The worst sleepover I've ever had. For context reasons, I'm going to explain why I was in the room that I was in. But also that I didn't find out about the history of the room until I was about to go to sleep. My dad's girlfriend at the time had 2 kids. We were all around the same age. We're in elementary school, so we got along for the most part. So occasionally we were having sleepovers, where my dad, brother, and me, we would all sleep over. It was usually somewhat fun, but I never really got along with, the daughters at times, but my brother and her son were best friends. And for privacy reasons, I'll call her daughter Liz. One night sleeping over, I suddenly wasn't allowed to sleep in the same room as Liz. She didn't want me to sleep in the same room, so she made me sleep in their new guest room. It looked nice, but there's a bunch of old photos that made me feel uncomfortable. I'd turned them down because, it felt like I was being watched from them. As a kid, I was scared super easily. I'd taken out my DS, and I was nice and comfy, drifting to sleep when Liz said goodnight. She also added before leaving that the room I was in was her grandmother's old room. The heck? That was my first thought, which was then followed by a realization that her grandma's dead, and has been for more than a week. Once I realized, I opened my little crack in the closet door to fully open. I didn't want to be in the dark, and it wasn't until it hit maybe 2 a.m. or later that the lights in the hallway went on. I saw through the bottom crack in the door a shadow of someone walking. Praying it was someone just using the bathroom, I opened the door hoping that whoever was out there would comfort me. As I opened the door, though, the hallway lights were off, with no one out there. I ran out of the room and in a frenzy banged on the room my dad and his ex were sleeping in. But as I did this, no one was answering. Then in my left ear, I hear a woman's voice whispering. I don't remember what she said to me, but I started crying and screaming for my dad, yelling that someone was there being, scared I was. He opens the door and looked more worried than I've ever seen him. I hugged him and balled in his arms and didn't say anything, just hugged me and comforted me. He slept in the room with me so I wouldn't be scared, and so I could get some sleep, especially since I had school the next day. The next morning my dad let me skip school, and, we ate breakfast downstairs, and he later mentioned that he was sorry he didn't answer the door as quick as he wanted to. So I asked him what does he mean. He said that whole night he was kept awake by a large dark shadow in the corner of the room. He was scared as well. He was afraid to get up thinking the banging was something else. Once he heard my story, we both agreed something bad was in the house, because we both confessed to each other that just felt anxious or uneasy when coming over. There's something stalking the mountains. Some background before we start. I live in the most northern part of Norway, which is almost the northern part of Europe. My home lies well above the Arctic Circle, which means for those of you unaware that we have a very short summer, so the sun never really sets very long, and winters where the sun never rises. Those long and cold months of darkness at the end of the beginning of the year made us into an understandably superstitious sort. There were many tales meant to safeguard us, to keep us, safe growing up. You have Stallo, the mountain troll who steals children who wander too far away from their home. You have Myling, who you will not see, but you can hear it stalk you, letting out the cries of a baby. And the Nook, who lies in waiting beneath the surface of lakes and rivers, waiting to drown any unsuspecting swimmers. My story begins when I was 16. I had just gotten my hunting license. My father had just bought the shotgun for my birthday. This was big for me as I'd always followed my father on hunting trips as a child. Never had actually shot myself. My father is a stereotypical northern Norwegian, He knows everything about the outdoors, and he can endure any hardship or weather with the same unwavering sense of macabre humor. Once his fingers got stuck in a saw at the workplace, peeled the skin of his middle finger like a banana peel. He promptly bandaged it up by himself and kept going. He didn't consider going to the doctors to get it looked at before almost 2 weeks had passed, and the stench of the bandages made him unbearable just to stay in close proximity. In the end, we needed a skin transplant, several weeks off work before his hand was remotely usable again. So the time of the year comes when the sun is out for a few hours in the morning. Me and my dad take the journey to the cabin. This includes an hour of driving and a further hour of a boat. You see, our cabin is in a remote area without any road access, so the only way to get there is by ferry. This means we somewhat always know who's out there, since most people only stay over the weekend. So when there's no holidays and the ferry only goes Fridays and Sundays during the weekend. That being said, there never really are any more than a handful of people out there at the same time, spread out on an area that's roughly larger than my hometown. This time, on the other hand, it was only me and my father taking the ferry that Friday, so we knew that we were going to be left alone over the weekend. Arriving on that small pier by the cabin, I could finally breathe in the fresh air of untouched nature. It's always been soothing for my soul. It's like you leave behind all your troubles at home, because out there, things are irrelevant. At the cabin, the only things that matter are just things that keep you safe, warm, and fed. We then dug out our snowmobile. It was parked near the pier and drove the short trip over to the cabin. That night we mostly spent preparing noose traps and lunch for the next day. My father told old stories when he went hunting back in the days and such, and we shared a ceremonial hunter's shot of single malt whiskey. I slept well that night. I normally do, but the peace and quiet of the cabin just kind of comes over me. We got out of the cabin late the following morning due to us just enjoying the calming of the morning with no obligations. This would turn out to be a mistake. You see, the key point is to be out early so you can utilize the sunlight as much as possible. We knew this, but sometimes you just want to sit down and eat a lazy breakfast and watch morning TV. When we'd arrived at the lava, imagine like a winter version of a teepee. We had set up the summer next to the lake, so it was now frozen, of course. My father decided that he would take it easy that day and just get it all warmed up. That way, when I returned from the mountain, there would be warm food and drink waiting for me. I'd previously spent a lot of time by myself around the area, so walking around the mountain alone never really bothered me. It still really doesn't to this day. So I started walking up the mountain overlooking the lake. It was difficult due to the heavy snow and me not bringing my skis. Instead, I opted for using an old pair of snowshoes I was hanging in the cabin. This resulted in me using way more time than needed to get up to where I was trying to find some grouse. I knew from previous experiences that, there's probably going to be grouse in this area. After a lot of effort, I made it up to the area despite being full of tracks and feces. It was abandoned. You see, it had snowed that night, part of the morning, so tracks must have been somewhat fresh, yet I couldn't hear or see anything. So I stalked the forest upon that mountain for maybe an hour without any traces of life. That's probably when I noticed the silence. It's like what people with similar experiences say. There's always this deafening silence that preludes something bad, like all the animals know to get out of there. I remembered for the first time since childhood that I felt uneasy about being alone up there. But of course, I wasn't about to go empty-handed back to my father, so I continued. As I was walking around listening intently to the sound that might give away any other form of life, I remember being amazed at how loud my footsteps were. At this point, I was like a tall yet skinny boy, like 60 kilograms or 154 pounds, even though I walked as slow and controlled as humanly possible. The uneasy feeling just creeping closer and closer to the point where I decided to take a quick snack break. regain my previously calm state of mind. As I walked back to a clearing overlooking the lake, my footsteps seemed to almost lighten, almost felt more relaxed and at ease again. I sat down on a rock and ate a bar of chocolate I'd bought and enjoyed the sun on my face. I was ridiculing myself for being spooked of what essentially was nothing. That's when I heard the footsteps coming from the direction I had just been in, loud and heavy footsteps of a grown man. I know this because, well, anybody can tell you the sound of a biped walking on 2 feet is quite distinct from 4-legged creatures, like moose or bear, especially in heavy snow. I tried calling out because I immediately thought it was my father who had like a change of heart, but no reply. I sat there in the rock watching the direction of the footsteps as they grew louder and louder. Several times I called out and yet I received no reply. Feeling uneasy again, I decided to take out my phone and try to call my father. There on my phone I had an unread message from my father delivered 3 minutes ago. Coffee and lunch is ready. Simultaneously, the footage where something was just getting louder and louder, and I knew whatever's on the other end was not my father. This, and knowing that, we're supposed to be the only 2 people in a radius of many, many kilometers, made me instantly jump up, grab my shotgun, and noped out of there as soon as I tied my snowshoes. As I was making my way at all heist, I could hear whatever was stalking me pick up the pace. I realized that the sound of my own footsteps and whatever it was that was after me was almost synchronized to the point that there was only a slight difference in when our feet hit the ground. I realized since that whatever it was had followed me since I had entered the forest on the mountain, it was because of why I felt like my footsteps were abnormally loud. I remember trying my best to run in like hip-deep snow, not carrying the thick layer of branches hitting my cold face or leaving red marks all over. It came to the point where I could hear the extra pair of footprints no more than 5 meters behind me, yet when I turned around it was nothing. I pushed all I had and I finally managed to reach the frozen lake on the other side of the lagoon. The extra pair of footsteps just stopped. Exhausted by the kilometer-plus run in high snow, I made my way to the lagoon. My father seemed almost amused by how tired I seemed. He handed me a hot cup of coffee and asked if I saw anything. I don't know what to say and was honestly embarrassed by what had occurred, so I said I only spotted many tracks, yet no birds. In later years I asked him about this and other strange occurrences around the area. The answers have always been roughly the same. Don't worry about it. Don't ask about it. Some things are better ignored. Unwelcomed basement dweller. Some background. I moved in with my boyfriend and his roommate last January. The apartment's small, but we shared the bedroom, the boyfriend and I. Didn't bring all of my stuff with me. Long story short, I'm a college student and my housing fell through for the winter semester, so the move was very impromptu. The bulk of my stuff, anything aside from clothes, books, school, and my laptop, has been left at my parents' house back in my hometown. This past August, we moved out of the apartment and bought our first house, so I was excited to get my things. After we were moving in, I began unpacking my stuff, which had originally been packed nearly a year and a half ago, back when I had to pack to move in with my parents. Most of what I have are books, art supplies, and trinkets, things I found at thrift stores or inherited. After enough things were discarded or donated or organized, I was finally able to bring my cat home. Couldn't bring her to the previous apartment that I had. As I started unpacking my things, which had been all moved to the basement so I could have space to sort and whatnot, the basement started to feel strange. Even when the lights were on, I felt like I was somewhere I shouldn't be. I explained this uneasiness to my boyfriend, but he doesn't believe me. Well, he doesn't believe anything that he can't see or explain. So he disregarded my uneasiness as getting used to the new home, like an emotional tax I was feeling from discarding items I had just outgrown or no longer wanted. I've hoarded in the past, so letting go of anything's pretty emotionally draining. I agree, since I knew the sorting and tossing made me emotional, and, well, often made me a bit irrational too. The problem. Then my cat came over. The uneasiness in the basement didn't change, but I felt better having my cat home with us. She was always a skittish kitty, so I wasn't really surprised when she hid from us making noise, like the creaky stairs. The problem started when she, a cat, became scared of the dark. She'd stare at the basement stairs when the light was on or the sun was coming through, but if you turned the light off, she'd stop what she was doing and go hide in the couch. It wasn't just me feeling uneasy, but I wondered too if my uneasiness made her feel it too. My vet says that she's just, still adjusting, but the sinking feeling I get from the basement now includes her kitchen. That's at the top of the steps next to the living room. I was ready to dismiss it as still adjusting to the change myself, so I just continued my routine. Earlier tonight I was washing up my coffee cup in the kitchen, getting ready for bed. Turned the light off but forgot my phone, so I turned around and turned the light on. When I did, at the top of the stairs I saw a face staring at me. It was leaned out of the top of the doorframe as if it was standing behind the wall. It was a pale, fleshy color with hollow eyes and long, thinning, greasy blonde hair. It had a mouth. I just don't remember it. I ran to the stairwell going upstairs, opposite end of the living room and away from the kitchen, grabbed my cat who'd already retreated to the landing and ran into our bedroom, closing the door behind me. This was just an hour ago. My boyfriend's worried the stress of moving across state, the pandemic, my father's failing health, and my all online now classes are just too much for me all at once, but he went downstairs, grabbed my phone, and wants me to call my former therapist in the morning. I, on the other hand, am honestly worried that I brought something with me when I went to my hometown to gather my own things. Everything was fine until I got here, before I unpacked it, before I brought these things back into my life. Until his apartment in January, I've always lived in uneasy places, but it wasn't until I lived without it that I realized I had been. Our home was fine, everything felt normal until my stuff was brought over, so I honestly don't think it's our home's fault itself. How do I go about finding whatever item this thing might be attached to? Is there a way to get rid of the thing? I feel crazy posting here like this, but I have to know. How do I make it go so I can have a peaceful home back? Grew up in a haunted house when I was a kid. Here's my experiences. When I was a kid, the house my mom and stepdad lived in was indeed haunted. Story goes that the kid that lived there before my stepdad killed his parents. These are my experiences and what all happened in the house. Not all of them were freaky or cruel, some were actually kind gestures. My mom lived in the house until I was 12. So right outside my mom's room there were 3 rusty red finger streaks, like same color as dried blood down the wall. And a couple more on the wall down the hall. They would paint over it and it would come back. You'd paint over it again and it would come back again. You'd wake up to the cabinet door slamming. One night my mom woke up and them slamming, and she walked out to the kitchen thinking somebody may be robbing them. She saw a shadow on the wall. She flipped on the light, nobody was there. One early morning after stepdad had left for work, somebody sat down on my mom's bed and covered her up with their blanket. I got locked in the bathroom. To make my mom wait outside the bathroom and I was in there. Somebody grabbed my cousin's ankles. My mom had, touch lamps, they would flicker and turn on and off. One morning the dishwasher had been ran and the dishes were clean, stuff would go missing all the time. The stone on my mom's wedding ring fell out and was lost. When they moved out of the house, my mom went back in to get her keys to leave for the new home, and the stone was sitting right next to her keys. Now, my mom had left my dad for the neighbor. My dad still lived in the house across the street. I know, kind of fucked up. Yeah. But he would watch the house when my stepdad and mom went out of town, and he would see the lights turned on and off at night sometimes. I was pretty young when this all happened, but I remember them pretty vividly. To this day, I don't watch haunting movies because they fuck me up pretty bad. Watched The Conjuring and couldn't sleep for a week. We went on vacation, so our ghost cat left. So my cat called Joe died from a heart attack around the age of 11. He was quite an aggressive cat in life and liked to play mind games with people just to be annoying. You know, block the stairs and the doorways knowing you were scared to walk over him because he might scratch you. Despite this, though, he still was a really lovely cat and would randomly jump on the bed during the night to cuddle and make sure you were alright. He was also a bit of a bully to her other cat, even though he was still protective of her. About a week after his death, I thought that I was still grieving. It was just my imagination when I started seeing Joe all around the house. It was never direct eye contact, always out of the corner of my eye in a doorway or on the stairs. I then started experiencing other things. When he was still alive, Joe and my other cat used to love opening up a cupboard in my room during the night. Don't know why, but they just did. When they did try and open it, it was always really loud and woke me up, leading to me shutting my bedroom door many times so they couldn't get in. But around the time I started to see Joe in the house, I would wake up in the morning and find my cupboard open even though my bedroom door had stayed closed all night so the other cat hadn't got in. And remember when I said he used to come in and sit on a bed during the night? There were many times where I'd wake up and find a dip in the bed, almost like someone or something was sitting there. After these occurrences, I began to suspect that it wasn't just my imagination. Joe was here to stay with us during his afterlife, but I wasn't yet truly convinced. A month into his casual hauntings, and the family all went for holiday for 2 weeks. When we returned, these occurrences and sightings suddenly ceased, and I began to think once again I had imagined the whole thing. It was after a conversation with my mother that changed my opinion. I mentioned to my mom, who does believe in the paranormal, that my other cat was no longer acting strange. It was because before we could catch her staring at her food bowl or into space at absolutely nothing. You can guess what it might have been. My mother then said, or maybe Joe isn't bothering her anymore. I asked her what she meant when she began to explain that she too had been seeing him around the house and other places that he'd like to sit, like on my windowsill when she left the house or under a bush in the garden. I also mentioned my experiences, and so had my brother. Then I had realized that when we had gone on vacation for 2 weeks leaving the house empty, Joe must have thought that we had left the house and, well, left him, giving him no more reason to be there. I still feel pretty bad to this day for leaving him. Hope he's found peace. The Little Boy. To start this off, I lived in an apartment with my now ex-girlfriend. She would always get her paycheck direct deposited into her bank account every Thursday night around 11 p.m. to midnight. I would walk to a nearby Circle K and use their ATM to take out some cash and get some stuff. There was one particular night when I took that walk to get cash that changed my thinking about the paranormal. Never believed in it before. I looked at her bank account information to see if it was deposited, and it was, so I went for my walk. There was this street I would take to get there faster. I would pretty much always use it, and as I was walking off the apartment property to get to that street, I noticed that the street lights were turned off. So it was very dark, but the only light that I had was coming off the houses I would walk by. Something didn't feel right to me, like there was someone behind me or someone staring at me. It's kind of unnerving, but made it down the street and kind of walked to the ATM. So I did my business, got the cash and stuff, and I'd usually take the same way back home. There was this corporate building with a huge parking lot that I'd walk through to get to that street. I'd usually walk down because, well, like I said, it was faster way home. Once I start walking down that street, I see a little boy in a plastic tricycle riding on the sidewalk. And once I saw this kid, he had to be like 9 or 10 years old. I passed by him, asked him where his parents are, and he just kept on riding without answering me. Very strange. So now I feel like I gotta do something about this. I mean, there's this little kid outside unsupervised and riding his tricycle around mid-afternoon of a school night. I became very concerned. I stopped and kept asking him where he lived, but he never responded to me. I almost called the cops, so now I'm getting even more concerned, and he keeps riding along the sidewalk near the perimeter of this house. There's this house that I would always walk by, and the lights were always on, so I decided to knock on the door. But this time, the boy had stopped right in front of this house and gave me a look like he was in trouble. The woman answers the door and asks me, "Can I help you?" I said, "Do you have a little boy? Because he's outside riding his tricycle right now. It's the middle of the night, and I'm just letting you know." She gave me this very cold look, like she wanted to punch me or hurt me, like she was mad. Anyway, she told me to leave or she'd call the cops, so I left. Now, here's where it gets very strange. The boy was nowhere to be found. He vanished. I would have heard him take off from his tricycle since it was a loud sound, but he was gone. I started to think that this little boy was playing with me, but as soon as I got off the woman's property, a man came out of the house very upset. He was crying and asked me why I made his wife upset. Well, I told him why. I'll never forget his tone and his demeanor when he explained. What I saw was the ghost of his son that died 30 years ago. He told me he was hit by a drunk driver on the same street around midnight when he was riding his plastic tricycle and died instantly. At this point, I'm freaking out. Apologized to the man, told him that I'm very sorry, and to tell his wife sorry as well. The man walked back to his house, looked into the street both left and right, most likely to see if he could see his son, shook his head, and went to his house. So I finally leave for good. I'm scared and sad at the same time, and it's a very unsettling feeling. As I was walking home, I got to the end of the street to get back to the apartment. I heard the little boy again riding his tricycle. Started to cry. I felt really sad, like a sadness I've never felt before. It was scary. This is the only paranormal thing I've ever been through. I still walk down that street whenever I would go to the ATM, and after that encounter, the street lights are always on. I never saw the boy again, but if I ever did, I told myself just to say hi to him and walk away. I was never scared again, and after that, I felt like nothing could ever scare me. I told my ex about it. She never believed me because she knew I didn't believe in the paranormal and thought I was just trying to scare her. She would walk down that same street to go to work, so to each his own, right? Poor little boy. Hope wherever he is, he's happy. Some of you may remember a couple of months ago when I told the story about a little boy riding his tricycle late at night when I was walking back from the Circle K. Well, found out from his own parents. That night what I saw was the ghost of their son that was killed by a drunk driver, and how upset they got. Well, I have an update, and it was a semi-encounter of that little boy. If you want to read my first post about my encounter, feel free to look at my profile and read it so to get a bit of understanding of what's happened. Anyway, this happened not long after my first post about my first encounter, which is weird. So I decided I'm going to take a walk down to Circle K like I always do. Go there around 2 or 3 times a week just to, get ready for my walk, and there's a street that I take to get there faster. For those of you that, read my first post about this encounter, you know what I'm talking about. Well, I always think to myself, how am I going to act if I see him again? How will I react? But I always told myself after seeing his ghost to not be scared and to say hello to him if I see him. So I start walking down that street, walk past the house where the little boy was killed in front of, and all the lights were turned off. I got that eerie feeling again, like I'm being watched. so I just shrug it off and move on. As soon as I get to the end of the street, I hear his tricycle again after, like, so long ago for the first time it happened. That sound of plastic wheels hitting the soft rocks on the sidewalk of the street, I get the chills. I think, oh man, it's him again. After all this time, after my first encounter, it's him again. Well, I turn around, but I don't see him. But I hear that sound of his tricycle. Made me crazy. All of a sudden, I hear him laughing. Thinking it's all in my head, and either he's just trying to play with me or it's something much darker. I keep walking and start thinking to myself, it's going to be okay, don't be scared, don't panic. I get to the Circle K and I get all my stuff and I start walking back. As I get to that street again, I see that house where his parents live at, and all the lights are turned on. They're all outside in their front yard like they were looking for something. I awkwardly walk on the other side of the street to try to avoid them, thinking to myself, I hope they don't see me and hope they don't talk to me. But they did. So the father gets my attention. I walk over and I said hello, and he said, "Did you see him again?" Well, the hair in my blood stood up, so I just told him the truth and said, "I only heard him riding around and laughing, sir. I'm so sorry." This is where it gets interesting. He told me that he started hearing laughing in his home. He heard loud banging outside his door, but no one was there. He proceeded to tell me that he overlooked his security cameras in his phone for motion detection and saw me walking about 15 minutes before the loud banging and laughing happened in his home. I got the chills again. I said to him, "If you don't mind me asking, does this happen often?" He said it only happens around this time of year. And that's the night Anthony died. Fucking 1989. He would have been 38 fucking years old. He was crying heavily and said a couple more things, but I couldn't make it out what he was saying. He was just crying that hard. It seemed like he was saying, "It's all my fault, it's all my fault." But now I got confirmation of the little boy's name, Anthony, and how old he would have been, which is 38 when the time of the years of these encounters happened. Well, my first encounter was about May and June 2019 when the father told me his son died 30 years ago, and how old he was when he died, which is 8. But what makes me feel so weird about this is that I am 38 years old, the same age that he would have been. I thought to myself, oh my god, it all makes sense now. I finally felt relieved on why I keep seeing or hearing this little boy when I walk down that street. We're the same age, and that's what we have in common. I felt like that little boy Anthony is comfortable around me because of how well in common we are. We said our goodbyes, and I told him, "I'm sorry you had to go through this. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. Don't blame yourself for what happened, please." He replied with, "I'm 68 years old. I don't have much time left. Hope I see him again one day." You have a lot of time left and you'll see him again. We shook hands and exchanged names, finally. So I'm walking home. I felt so bad for those parents. The mother didn't even, want to talk to me, just like the first encounter. I felt like she was blaming me for the reason why these ghostly encounters of their son are happening. But I know that's not true. I just happen to be there when it happens. Anyway, I felt like I was holding on to my heartstrings after that. I'll now feel 100% confident about seeing the little boy now. I'll never be panicked or scared ever again. How I encountered a demon because I'm a dumbass. So I was 15 when this happened. Secondly, please feel free to comment or help me make sense of this experience. I haven't talked about it within the community before, only exceptionally close friends. So when I was 15 back in 2012, I played guitar for a metal band. Metal bands like Demons and Ghosts and all that. We're hanging out at the drummer Elliot's house, just him and her friend Nathan, his girlfriend Kendra, a girl named Hannah, and my current girlfriend Ashton, and myself. Things got boring, so naturally we decided to contact the afterlife. This would be my first time ever. I'm not sure of others in the room, but our friend Nathan had been doing this for a while. Ashton had a peculiar interest in these things, too. Nathan lights 5 candles in the shape of a star. The lights were turned off, and he had a pinnacle necklace. His hand was holding the necklace, pinnacle dangling from his knuckles. Began asking questions to anything that could hear us. Hello, are you there with us? Is there anything with us? Those types of questions. We asked it to reveal itself. Pinnacle moved faster, just swinging over the candle with every single question. Nathan's hand still was just completely not moving. Blood was introduced by Nathan. The pinnacle now covered in his own. No one else used their blood. The activity picked up. A notebook flew across the room. Our friend Hannah had 3 scratches on her upper back, parallel to each other. I heard what sounded like an animal growling deeply, deeper than any growl I've ever heard, and I listened to that heavy music, so I knew what a growl sounded like. It was almost within the walls. It was like I was hearing it, not with my ears, but with my mind's ear, if that makes sense. The growling was in the walls, but also in my ears simultaneously, getting cold chills just writing this. Nathan began feeling a burning sensation across his chest. It was from his right hip to his left shoulder. We stopped the encounter, no goodbyes, no closing anything, just turning the lights on, blowing out the candles and talking. Hannah showed her scratches, Nathan showed her where that sensation was. Both red, both same characteristics. Elliot mentioned to us shortly after the encounter that the previous owner of the home was an abusive alcoholic. He forced his son into the car with them while he was drunk and ended up crashing the car, killing both father and son. We concluded that Nathan's burn and mark was from the hip diagonally to shoulder was pretty consistent with the seatbelt burn one would get in a car accident, which was quite likely to be on the previous owner of the house's body after the crash, consistent with the driver's seatbelt. But that wasn't the end of it. For months, Elliot reported to us that he would hear whispers, that he would see his dog barking at nothing, that things would move, that he would feel watched. He would hear things in his ear saying his name, Elliot. Confused in fear, confessed the incident to his mother, who had been witness to the paranormal events in the house. They didn't think the other would believe them. I don't know any of her recounts, just that she's had them. They said the house has been cleansed and blessed shortly after. I believe with holy water and sage by a preacher. We're in the South Bible Belt, so it's hard to imagine the social dilemma of telling a preacher what he'd been experiencing. He would just go back over there to that house, and same room, it was never the same again. The energies between us were strained, and I believe everybody could read the fear in each other's eyes, but were just too scared to mention it. 23 now. My friends make me tell the story at campfires. I want to understand it deeper. So if anybody'd like to add to this or help enlighten me on what I would have encountered, how it could be affecting us today. I have manic depression and anxiety, much to my girlfriend Ashton, I'm still with her. If somebody could please relate to me on the whole hearing it with your mind, but also the walls thing, that would help a lot. Nathan's also currently on hard drugs. He's constantly fighting for an identity. We haven't talked in years. I believe I really just want some answers. I do pray. I just heard a door squeak open in my house, so I'll check it out. Then pray. In an old, nearly forgotten graveyard. So first off, I admit I generally don't believe most ghost stories I hear. I mean, they are mostly made up. But that said, I have seen a ghost indisputable proof as far as I'm concerned. Let me take you back to when I was probably 12 or 13. Tell you a little story of how I thought I was going to die. For a little backstory, there was a graveyard in a small town, like 7,000 people. It was on a dirt road about a mile from anything, and we lived on that dirt road just outside of town, so we could have horses. But a few miles from here, the graveyard was much further out. Everybody knew about it, and even had a great axe murder and ghost story to it. I knew where it was, but I'd never seen it. So when I was in 7th grade, well, somewhere between 7th and 8th, one of my good friend's grandfathers had come to town for a visit. I had met most of his family over the years, but had never heard of his granddad, so I was surprised to find out that he was in town. Since I spend most days with my friend, typically at his house, and, well, was in town but closer to video games. I met him, spent time talking to him, and got to know him a little bit. His wife had died many years before. I'm pretty sure I'm 12, and it sounded like she had died in the Civil War. He just spent his retirement driving around America, looking for haunted places. Now, as an adult, I have so very many questions about that, but at the time I just accepted it and didn't dwell. One night after dinner at my friend's house, Granddad asked if there was any haunted places in town. My friend's parents pooh-poohed it and just said no, but when they left the room, my friend was like, "There is a haunted cemetery." I mentioned to my disbelief, but my granddad, I'm sorry I was too self-absorbed at the time to learn his name, but his eyes lit up and he asked where it was. Obviously, my friend was quick to tell him. So whereas my friend's house was in town, in quotes, it was about half a mile from my dirt road. It was about 3 miles one way. The graveyard was about 1 mile the other way. It was close. Armed with this knowledge, Granddad decided that we would walk to the graveyard. I was pragmatic and, well, risk-averse in those days and expressed my concern with walking to the isolated graveyard in the middle of nowhere at midnight. Oh yeah, he wanted to be there at midnight, but he assured me that he had encountered many ghosts, and that we'd be safe. Not really believing the place was haunted, I agreed to go. Man, this is long, sorry. Never put this in writing, so I'm trying to capture everything. It's pretty good, though. So I go over to my friend's house the next day. I practically lived there in the summer. We hung out, did our thing, but Granddad just seemed lit up with the excitement. Thought about telling him the ghost stories were made up, but we had a pass to stay up all night, and I wasn't about to mess that up. He'd have to deal with his disappointment on his own time. Not knowing exactly how far it was, but believe it or not, smartphones haven't been around forever. Headed out at like 10:30 to walk down a dirt road for over a mile with no house or building along the way. No streetlights on the dirt roads to nowhere. The dirt road came along the south side of the cemetery to where it intersected with the dirt road the entrance is on. All along the cemetery was a small grove of trees. They were blocking all view into it. I knew it was on the other side of the wrought iron fence, just kinda couldn't see it. We turned onto the next dirt road to the entrance of the cemetery, walked up to the gates. Oh yeah, there were gates. So, very old wrought iron gates with an arch on top on each side of the narrow dirt road lined with pine trees leading in. It was a stone gargoyle. I shit you not, stone gargoyles and wrought iron. We went in and walked about 500 feet or so to the end of the road. It was one road that It was one road that circled the statue of Christ. Somebody had money. It was in a teardrop shape at the end, and you go back the way it came. Not built for two-way traffic. The cemetery was mostly to the left, which was north, with a few tombstones to the right, and then the trees blocking all the view that way. When we got to the end, it was probably 11:30, but I didn't have a watch and couldn't be sure. We talked about how the legend has it is that the Christ statue bleeds on Halloween. Believable, right? And that there's an axe murderer who nobody knows the name of. Understand my skepticism. They were buried in this haunted place. We talked like this for a while, and at some point my friend started arguing with his granddad. That's when I heard it. That was it. One click, then nothing. At the time, it sounded like two rocks being struck together, like small rocks. But I can assure you, after much trial and error, that was exactly the sound. A few minutes later, again assuming the time here, my friend's still arguing, I hear... This time, it was in a different location. This must have been when my spidey sense started kicking in, because I started telling him to shut up and listen. But they didn't. Again, from somewhere else. This time, my friend's granddad was like, "Did you hear that?" Imagine my response was typical of a 12-year-old who had just been trying to tell you. I don't know if I'd said anything a few moments later. What the fuck? Did it just go from 1 to 2? Also from a completely different location. I don't know if it was a full moon, but if it wasn't, it was close. It was pretty bright out there, looking all through the graveyard for any movement. Now my friend and I are pretty fucking nervous. Not really sure what's going on, but I know I don't like it. It's never from the same place. We don't see anyone moving. Granddad lays on his stomach, starts looking across the graveyard. I'm sure somebody asked. He told us that he could see movement against the skyline better, which amazingly in the broad moonlight he could. All three of us just laying in the grass. I really couldn't say why, but it was when it did the 3 clicks that I fucking knew we were in trouble. It kept coming from different places, so I sure wasn't going anywhere. And I think deep down I also realized it was a problem. So all of us were silent, just straining to see any movement ahead, and it sounded close. But not right there, if that makes sense. Still moving around. Fuck. Like I know time's running out. Granddad also seems agitated. My friend was looking about how I imagined I was looking. No movement, no sound, no wind. At that movement, something came walking towards us. It was right there, maybe 12 feet away and coming towards us. One moment it wasn't there, and the next it was. Didn't really seem like it appeared right then, but I don't know, like there was a shrub there along. I don't really pay attention to it until it stood up and came toward me. I really can't explain that part, it was just there. Scrambling to my feet, my friend's clawing his way to his feet, and his granddad slowly stands up and tells us to run. Well, no shit. We were already running. Now in that slowed down brain thing when you're scared as shit, I made a point to look at its feet. Without dating myself too badly, but when I was a kid, the killer in the slasher movies always wore boots. Guess I was just looking for confirmation that we really were going to die. But there were no feet. What approached us was like cloaked. The outside gray and the inside completely pitch black. No feet. I could clearly see under it was lying down. So remember that some robed figure was quickly advancing. My friend and I started running toward the gate, and sure as hell that thing was just lit out after us. Granddad starts yelling some crazy-ass Latin shit. Starts out Ca-Ray, found out later it's Pueblo Indian chant to keep away the dead. And the thing stops. Keeps just turning from us to him back and forth, making a decision, and then it sunk into the ground. Gone. We didn't stop. Kept running until we were on the dirt road and waiting for Granddad. We came walking out excited as hell, but we were no longer amused. We wanted to go home. Walked 100 feet by dirt road and then walked past the wooded cemetery again. About halfway past, we heard the most chilling scream from the graveyard. We all stopped. That was definitely the closest I'd ever come to pissing myself. My blood froze, my hair stood up, and I shivered. It scared me. Granddad takes a step back toward the graveyard. We're all like, what the fuck? Where are you going? He tells us somebody might need help. I remember looking at him saying, yeah, us. We need to get home. We turned and walked the rest of the way to my friend's house. As we were going to sleep, Granddad stops by the room and says, let's go again tomorrow night. Damn, I feel like I lost my own attention with all that. So I just wanted it as complete as I could remember. It was many, many years ago. So of course I went back to a nearly forgotten graveyard, otherwise known as How Stupid Are You? Where was I? Well, right, Granddad said we should go again tomorrow night. I honestly don't remember if I slept much or not. That age, you could go for days. The next morning, right after breakfast, Granddad said he was going to walk the graveyard and look at it in the daytime. Honestly, I have no idea if this man had a car. I was a really self-absorbed kid upon reflection. Naturally armed with sunlight, I was very interested in going back. Funny how the sun makes a difference in, well, what things look like. We left the house fairly early, like 10-ish. I really didn't keep track of time back then. Walked to the graveyard along the dirt road. In the light of day, it was a fairly pleasant walk, past fields for cattle and some, well, unused, apparently, but it was pleasant and I didn't have a sense of dread, which was nice. Couldn't tell you what time we got there, but it was early afternoon. Well, you just did. We walked right to the big statue of Christ at the end of the road. Kind of stood there looking around, getting our bearings and checking things out. And I'll be honest, I really don't remember who noticed which things, I just know what we discovered. We all went into detective mode and started looking around. Fairly quickly, we saw that a grave about 10 feet from where we were, directly in front of where we were laying, had a statue of the Virgin Mary next to it. Maybe 2 feet tall, robed figure. Eerily familiar. Pretty much where I first saw, but whatever. We discussed this in great length and all agreed that what we saw was a robed figure, lightish on the outside, black on the inside. Upon reflection, I find it quite interesting that we didn't discuss what we saw until that moment. Obviously, it wasn't a 2-foot statue that approached us, but the similarity was not lost on us. We then went and looked at where it quote-unquote disappeared. And nope, no ditch, no depression, no secret Scooby-Doo hidey hole. Just flat ground. Pretty sure this was when Granddad told us that he was shouting was like an ancient Pueblo Indian chant to keep away the dead. I'm not likely to forget that. Can't remember the chant, but I know I heard it. Fortunately, that doesn't give me much comfort. I don't feel like I could shout K-Ray, the chant to keep you away, don't make me say the rest, and it would work. It was bright and sunny. And pretty hard to picture the terror from the night before, but we were investigators and I was personally invested. The graveyard went north about a quarter mile. Most of the tombstones were 50 years old or older. They were on the northern edge. They were much older. In the other statue, there was nothing else. After about an hour, we went back to my friend's house. Granddad still wanted to go back that night and told us that we didn't have to go. It was fine if we stayed at home, apparently. I'm not sure what my reasoning was, but I was in for another go. I think that was the first time I realized that I might have a high threshold for fear. Maybe it was because I said I was in and he wasn't going to be left out, maybe because my friend was as stupid as me, but he was also in for the ride. It was agreed. We would go back again tonight, come what may. If you thought the hours moved slow when you were young, this was like dog years for a kid. That day just wouldn't end until it did. We were watching something on TV when Granddad walks up and says, "It's time." It felt like I was part of an A-team. We were about to run a mission. It was time. We left later this time, and then we knew how long it took to get there. Of course, the goal was still midnight. It went so well the first time, and as we walked, I started wondering what was up with the ghost. Like, why did it come after my friend and me and not Granddad, who was just standing there? Started to be a bit concerned about it, to be honest. But we were nearly there, and I was sure that I wasn't going to wimp out. Got to the gate just before midnight. Who knew Granddad wore a watch? Stood there, looking at the gargoyle of the dark entrance. Yeah, full moon or not, it was overcast and dark as hell. We all looked at each other, took a deep breath, and my friend and I wimped out. "I can't do it, sorry." I don't know which one said it first, but the other immediately agreed. And just so we're clear, it was probably it was me who chickened out. But regardless, I'm glad we did. "That's fine, I'm going to go in there for a minute and look around." And there we are, slowly realizing that we're standing alone in a dirt road, surrounded by trees on all sides of the road, watching Granddad disappear into the darkness of the tree-covered entrance. He was just out of sight when we heard it. Somewhere in that graveyard, it was starting up again. My friend and I alone in the dark in the front alley, just fucking creepy graveyard. This was a bad idea. Without saying a word, we were just in a very in-depth conversation without running away. Like, wait, what happened to the other two with the one clicks? This is happening fast. Two 13-year-old boys alone in the dark, miles from help. Granddad's in there somewhere, but he's not here. What if he just comes for us? Where's Granddad? Doesn't he know we have to go now? What if we just run? Will he be okay? What if we run and it finds us and Granddad isn't there? K-Ray, in a loud booming voice moving towards us quickly. Everything stands still, no wind, no sound other than the chanting of my Granddad. Then movement in the darkness coming towards us, moving fast. It's entirely possible we were holding hands at this point because it's like we were moving as one, no communication needed. One step, two steps. We're just starting to run when we see Granddad running down the narrow road out of the graveyard toward us. We stop and here comes help. It occurs to me that it's not a good sign that he's running. I don't know what level of scared shitless I was before I thought about why he would be running, but I was plenty scared shitless and I realized Granddad was scared enough to run. Despite every inclination to run upon seeing Granddad, we stopped. We waited for him to get to us. It felt like years watching him run towards us. We were across the dirt road from the entrance, I guess like 12 feet away. Maybe somebody can tell how wide an average dirt road is, but we were watching as Granddad came running towards us. At the time I didn't think anything of it, but upon reflection that man was pretty badass. He was full-on jogging, no sign of age there. Out of the darkness of the tree line, he ran. I can't describe the relief I felt when he got to us. I knew I was completely out of my depth and just had no business being there. Granddad did. This was his thing, and now he was with us. We were safe. Thought you two might have run away. That's why I ran out. Didn't want you out here alone. That's what he said as he turned around to look at the graveyard. Nothing. Silence. We turn and start walking home. Many questions on my mind when I feel it. We all felt it. We all turn around and look at the entrance of cemeteries and walk away. I feel it long before I see it. Angry, hateful, violent in the darkness between the trees is another darker darkness. It's moving fast. I'm positive there was no sound, but in my head it was a loud scream. Full of anger and disappointment. This might just be my imagination, but shit was a bit out of control right then. And that's when I felt like racing up the strip of gravel that was the road in the cemetery was a cloaked figure that I knew too well. It was moving fast, incredibly fast. We started to run as it raced toward the gate. My feet are moving, we're starting to run, but not nearly as fast as this thing. I feel dread, hopelessness. I know there's no way we're going to outrun this, but I'm sure giving it my best. And just as we start moving, it flies down that road to the gate, moving so fucking very fast. It'll only take a second before it's on us. Yes, Kako. I feel weak, but I keep moving my feet. It's so fast it's closing the last few feet to the gate, and we're running, looking back as it's closing in. Bam! It stops. Like it hit a brick wall, it stops the gate. We run. It watches. I feel the anger radiating from it. I run faster. I can't tell you how I ran while looking back, laser focused on the shrouded figure, twitching and jerking as I watched us run off, but it did. I ran like the wind, and so did my friend and Granddad. They had watched us far longer than we could. We eventually stopped running and walked the rest of the way home, and nobody talked. We got home, and my friend and I went to bed. I doubt I slept that night. Went home the next day and didn't go back to my friend's house for a while. His Granddad left a few days later and I never saw him again, but just before the next school year, that friend moved away and I never saw him again at all. Another friend of mine, actually a fairly new friend at the time, and would, later be with me for the next 30 plus years and then tell all the kids the story, but they did call Grandpa after I told him all this. I don't know exactly what was said, but at the end my friend said the 12-year-old equivalent of "oh fuck" had one person who believed me. That same friend. I've had some pretty crazy things happen after that, but those are stories for another time. Besides, only one of them is a ghost story. The rest are just stories. When I'm not being the most average boring man, I tend to get myself in predicaments. If you don't believe this, I don't blame you. That said, every part of the story is true. I don't have answers. I don't know why us, why then. I've been back there a few times, not at midnight. I'm only partially stupid. Never seen anything like that since. Through the basement window. I'm fuzzy on the year, but I believe this story takes place the summer before my previous story. I was around 11 or 12 years old. About midsummer, one of my friends from pretty nearby-ish, like a 45-minute drive, they were staying at my house for the week, maybe 2, could have been 3. That's how we rolled back then. We were the kids who often carried sticks or other weapons on our treks through the countryside, for protection, of course, not because we thought it made us look cool. As we would want to do, we were out and about late one night just doing our thing. I have no idea what day it was, but I think it was a weekday. It was late sometime after 11 p.m. We decided to take a walk through the fairly new homes built next to my house. People have been living in the new houses for maybe a year or so by this point. As we're walking past one house, we can see some light flickering from the basement window. Naturally, that caught our attention as all the lights were off the houses and nobody seemed to be up. But for science, we decided to take a peek, see what was going on. We get down and crawl up the little half window and look in. The lights are off, we don't see anybody there, just a cake. In the middle of an empty room sat a small table with a birthday cake on it, candles burning, creating a light. I don't know how long we laid there watching the candles burn, but it was long enough for us to notice that there were no people in the room and no one blowing out the candles. No one waiting for their piece of cake, no one. Finally dawns on us that it's pretty strange to have a birthday party at midnight. Enter the unease. Now, this particular friend, I would learn over the years, was my ride-or-die friend. This was only the first time we walked into crazy together. With an obvious mystery on our hands, we decide to investigate. We walk to the front of the house, no cars in the driveway, no porch light on, no light in the house. Strange. We started going around the house, pretty brazenly looking in windows. We look in the garage windows, no car. The next window, no one, no movement, no lights, no sound. Next windows, bedrooms, from little we could see past the shades. No light, no movement, no people. There's a basement window on this side, too. Dark. See and hear nothing. On to the back. Big and empty, dark and occupied living room. Still no light or movement. We can see into the kitchen and know on this house does not seem to have people in it. It's furnished, so somebody lives here. Back to the original side, flickering light from the basement window, we crawl up and look again. There is a birthday cake, candles lit on a table in the middle of an empty basement. Seriously, what is this? We can't wrap our brains around the scene, so we wait. Nothing. Absolutely nothing happens. We wait, watch the candles flicker, and nothing. I don't know how long we laid there, but it gave it a good while. Only the lonely cake with flickering candles. After 30 minutes or longer, we get up, walk around the house again, verify it's still unoccupied, and stare at each other. Why is there a lit birthday cake sitting all alone in the basement? Who put it there and where are they now? Who's supposed to be having cake at midnight? What the fuck is going on here? The more we talked about it, the weirder it seemed, until we properly spooked ourselves. And one last peek. Yep, cake's still there, still alone. Time to leave. This wasn't our problem to solve, and we were tired, so we walked back to my house to go to bed. To this day, my friend and I bring this up, and just curious happening in my childhood with no explanation. It's just about the creepiest thing I've experienced without it actually being scary. A single cake, alone in a basement, wishing a person who wasn't there a happy birthday. I guess you don't always get answers. Some things are just a mystery. Kind of appreciate that. Sometimes not knowing is more interesting than the truth. I hate how cliche this sounds, but I had an experience on Friday the 13th. To preface this, I'm pretty sure the area my friend lives in has occultists because we've had a few strange run-ins while out in the wood suburbs. We just try to ignore strange happenings, but also tempt fate a bit, which is why we went out walking at night on Friday the 13th. There aren't too many streetlights, and sometimes the sidewalks abruptly end, so it was dark enough that walking or driving around would require the use of a flashlight or headlights, especially to avoid deer. But anyway, since it was the weekend and we were bored high schoolers at the time, we decided the nearby elementary school would be empty this late at night. We could mess around on the playground. We had an uneventful 20-minute walk over, jumped a median fence into the playground. Another 20 yards or so furthest from the school, on the front face of the school, had a looped road off the main road that we walked on. The only lights on were the outdoor ones on the school's entrance. The front of the school was empty when we walked into the playground. Sat on the swings, talked for half an hour before I noticed there was a cop car sitting outside the school's front. Pointed it out to my friend, she froze. It was silent outside all night. Neither of us heard the car pull up, and the angle the swings were at kind of meant that a car pulling up would have cast its headlights right on us, which we would have also noticed, but there were no lights and no other car had passed by either. The car was parked there silently in the dark with only the school's front lights on. Everything felt wrong about it. It was an even older model car than the county doesn't even use anymore. It was kind of hard to see in the dark, but it looked like there was a lone, pale figure in the driver's seat with no facial features. Completely smooth face. My friend and I calmly got off the playground, jumped the fence again, and left the way we came. No idea what it was other than it seemed to appear out of nowhere. It gave both of us, well, really off-putting vibes. Still gives me the chills years later. Thanks. See ya.